Hello and welcome to my channel. It's story time. And yes, it's of Ronald, our mate Ronald. And yes, it's Mrs. Ronald. So, this one is written by me, illustrated by me. But anyway, it's about the Isle of Wight. I love to go to the Isle of Wight. And this one is where Ronald and Mrs. Ronald went to the Isle of Wight. And it's about the little train that's on the island. Now, as I'm reading it, obviously it's in sheets, so I do hope that the paper doesn't rattle too much to upset their story. Let's get going. It was a bright sunny day, and Ronald and Mrs. Ronald had decided they needed their Isle of Wight fix. An Isle of Wight fix being a trip on the hovercraft over to the Isle of Wight for the day. Ronald was full of excitement, just like a child would be. He loved visiting the island. Actually, he could see the island every time he and Mrs. Ronald visited the seafront, which was at least 4 times a week. They did love the sea. They would usually make up a picnic and sit at the seafront eating their lunch. This could be at Southsea, Eastney, Hayling Island, Witterins, or even Southsea. Mind you, by the time they went around the coast at Southsea, the island was not as clear as the preferred spot in Southsea. Then, of course, they could go around the other side of the coast to Gosport, Leon Solent, even down as far as Leamington, to still be able to see the Isle of Wight across the water. The main car ferries went from Portsmouth to Fishbourne, Southampton and Leamington. However, for this day, it was a quick 10-minute hop over on the hovercraft. Ronald had been hopping over to the island many years over that time. He could only ever remember going to the island on the train just once. He's sure he must have travelled on it as a child, but that being some time ago, he finds it slips his memory. That one ride proved rather eventful, in that Ronald and Mrs. Ronald did not know how the train managed to stay on the rails. The train itself was rather old, an old London tube train, in fact, and the rails themselves were rather unloved. They did smile at each other, and just the mere suggestion of ever stepping a foot back on the train again after calling it the death train. But here they were, sat at the hovercraft terminal, waiting the next hovercraft to take them across the short stretch of water to their beloved Isle of Wight. They had travelled from home to Southsea in Ronald's van. We know Ronald's van, don't we? Parked it up in the car park right opposite the hovercraft terminal, which was handy. Then walked across the road and into the terminal to the ticket desk. 2 senior return tickets, please, Ronald asked the lady behind the desk. They took a seat and waited. Would the island train be any improved? Would the rails be any more loved and taken care of? The excitement grew in Ronald's tummy. The terminal was filling up with other passengers. It looked like the hovercraft was going to be quite full. Ronald wondered, why are all the other people travelling today? Are they holidaymakers? Are they business people? Perhaps a school trip? Or just like him and Mrs. Ronald, simply day trippers? Picture of the hovercraft. The journey took 9 minutes. Ronald always liked to time it. It might have been a bit less here or there, but there was a warship coming into the harbour today, so the hovercraft had to go behind it. This was actually maritime rules, or maritime law even. It was a safety procedure that no 2 ships would cross each other's path. In other words, they would not place themselves in each other's way so as to crash into each other. You never sailed in front of another vessel or ship. You always went behind. This particular day, even though the sun was out, the water was not exactly smooth. Ronald had been on worse, but Mrs. Ronald was not exactly a great sailor. She was not into waves at all, but today the crossing was fine for her. Once the hovercraft came to a stop at Ryde, all the passengers were able to get off. Ronald and Mrs Ronald made their way out of the terminal, across the road, up over the footbridge that went over to the island's railway line. They walked through the bus station, seeing all the buses lined up ready to take eager passengers around the island, and into the train station ticket office. They wanted to catch the train from Ryde Esplanade to Shanklin, which actually was the end of the line as far as the train went. Mrs Ronald asked for 2 senior tickets on a return to the end of the line. That would be £2.50, the lady at the desk said. Ronald and Mrs Ronald looked at each other in amazement. Is that all? They said together. I can make it more if you like, said the lady. No, thank you. That's a bargain, said Ronald. A return ticket to Shanklin for £2.50. Oh, said the lady. When you said the end of the line, I thought you meant to the end of the pier. But if you hurry, you can just catch the train at the platform and pay for your tickets once on board. Righty-ho, said Ronald, and off they dashed to catch the train before it shut all of its doors and pulled out of the station. They made it just in time. The doors closed and away the train went. Both Ronald and Mrs Ronald looked at each other and laughed. No, the train was not any better, nor was the line at the train tracks. They didn't feel as though they were loved, any more than the last time they took the journey. They spent the whole 20 minutes giggling like school children as they were thrown up and down and side to side in their seats. The conductor did come round and asked for ticket money. In the end, it cost them £8.80 return for the 2 of them, not the £2.50 bargain as was once thought. While on the train, they tried to look out the windows to see the scenery. Because they were being bobbed about so much and laughing, they didn't see much at all. Thankfully, the train did slow down when it pulled into the station. The actual stops were Ryde Pier, Ryde Esplanade, Ryde St John, Brading, Lake, Sandown, and the end of the line, Shanklin. By the time it pulled into Shanklin station, Ronald and Mrs Ronald were ready to get off. They'd been thrown about for long enough, but it was rather fun. While on the journey, Ronald did spot something rather funny on one of the metal plates at the end of the carriage. It said 007. You need to be a daredevil to ride on this train, said Mrs Ronald to Ronald. They both had to agree there. Once off the train, they took a leisurely stroll down to the actual seafront. It was one road down the hill. They could do the going down bit. It was the coming back up that might have been a problem. Not so this time, because Ronald and Mrs Ronald had been to Shanklin before and knew there was a lift along the seafront that they could take him back up the hill to the main flat shopping area. So this was not going to be a problem for them today, or so they thought. They always had a plan B, and the lift was their plan B today. Whilst walking along the seafront, they decided to stop for a spot of lunch. Being over on the island, they had not taken their usual picnic with them, as it would have been rather bulky to carry around. It was okay to take when they went out in Ronald's van at home. You could take anything you liked, or more or less, in his van. He had plenty of room in it. But no, today was their out day, and they would treat themselves to lunch as well. Next page. They did not stop at the first cafe they came to along the seafront, as they had stopped there on their last visit. This time they stopped at the second cafe, where there were rather a lot of places that you could eat dotted along the seafront. Anyway, Ronald ordered an all-day breakfast, and Mrs Ronald ordered ham, chips and egg. When it came, it was very nice too. Ronald had often thought of moving over to the island. He did love it so much. One day, he thought. One day. Mrs Ronald was not such a keen mover as Ronald, so this was why he had only thought about it to himself, rather than saying it out loud. After they'd finished their lunches, they took a short walk. In fact, no more than a few steps across the road, and sat on a bench to take in the fresh air. The sound of the waves lapping at the seawall, the sun shining down on them, such a lovely day, along with them getting their much-needed vitamin D sunshine boost. After all, they were in need of after the long winter months. There were people around, so it was not on school holidays or the main holiday season, so it was not overcrowded at all. Ronald loved to listen to the waves. There was something exciting yet refreshing about the noise. He could close his eyes and dream that he was on a desert island. Lovely, he thought. I know, we've just had lunch, said Mrs. Ronald, but could we have an ice cream? Of course, said Ronald. It would not be able to resist an ice cream, so off he went back across the road to fetch 2 whopping big ice cream cones. Soft and whippy for me, please, said Mrs. Ronald. Just as I like them. So it was a 99 for Mrs. Ronald, and Ronald himself had spotted the flavoured ice cream tubs. He could not resist a rum and raisin flavoured cone. He could have chosen any one of them, strawberry, toffee, coconut, vanilla, mint, even triple chocolate. But no, it was rum and raisin for him, being his favourite flavour. 2 happy customers there then. They sat for a while longer and enjoyed their ice creams. Now they were thinking of the lift back to the top of the town and a short walk through the shops to the train station. Oh dear, said Ronald. What? Said Mrs. Ronald. Looks like we're out of luck with a lift. There's fencing all around the bottom of it. Oh dear indeed, said Mrs. Ronald. What are we to do now? Looks like a slow walk up to the side of the cliff, said Mr. Ronald. Said Ronald. Not the roadway? Asked Mrs. Ronald. No, I can see steps that wind up the side of the cliff. Oh dear, said Mrs. Ronald again. Well, they made it look easy, and they made it up the steps, stopping for a rest every now and again, of course. They were eventually at the top, so ready to walk through the shops and onto the train station. I think we might need a nice cup of tea by the time we get back to Ryde, the stop where they get off, said Mrs. Ronald. Good idea, said Ronald. As they made their way up the high street, they remembered the shops from their last visit. The florist that had the gifts, well, where they bought the wooden yacht, and the shop where they bought the 2 trays with beach huts on them. As they walked along, Mrs. Ronald spotted a kind of bric-a-brac come antique shop. Can we take a look inside? She asked Ronald. Sure, he said. This was only a small shop, but was so much to see. Ronald and Mrs. Ronald loved antique shops, and this was no exception to the rule. There were old watches, pictures in frames, old photo albums with black and white photos in them, jewellery and ornaments, big clocks, and strangely enough, a rail with new clothes on it. There was also pottery and even an old wooden rocking horse. But what had caught Ronald's eye was an old brown leather case. Ronald had one case at home already, which he kept his fresh day cover stamps in and writing paper and envelopes, with even some vintage postcards. He was a bit of a collector at heart, but as one was now pretty much bulging at the seams, this other case, he thought, would come in really handy. The price tag said £45. As always, Ronald asked if that was the best price. The lady in the shop said she would get it off the shelf for him to look at before he's made his mind up. She did not know Ronald at all, that if he'd seen something he wanted, he was going to have it. The shop lady took the other bits and pieces out of the way to reach the case. Then she handed it to Ronald. Oh, yes, he said, it's going to be mine. Ronald paid the shop lady a better price of £38, and off they went. Mrs. Ronald was chuckling to herself. Well, what's so funny? Said Ronald. You look like an evacuee from the war in that case. All you need is a label on a piece of string around your neck, and it will fit the bill. They both laughed and made their way back to the station. The brown leather case was rather heavy, and that was without anything in it. They didn't make them like that anymore, said Ronald. Good job, said Mrs. Ronald, or we'll be all have arms past our knee. Eventually they got to the train station, and the train pulled in. The journey back seemed less bumpy, but it may have been because they'd had all the shocks from the journey to Shanklin. At Sandown, a lot of schoolchildren boarded the train, obviously on their way home. The carriages quickly filled up, but they were all well behaved. Some got off at Brading and some off at Ryde St John. By the time the train stopped at Ryde Esplanade, where Ronald and Mrs. Ronald would get off, the carriages were almost full again. Almost empty again. Let's try that. As there was still a bit of sun left in the day, Ronald and Mrs. Ronald walked around to the cafe on Ryde Seafront for a well-earned cup of tea. When they went to get on the hovercraft, the attendant took the case from Ronald to put in the hold. There was not a lot of room inside, and the likes of cases. Ronald hoped it would be all right out of his sight, even if the big brown covering of the old case was rubbing off on his trousers. He would have liked to have sorted it out once he was home. That would be a fine job for him down in his workshop. Ronald liked working in his workshop. It had been a long but enjoyable day. Both Ronald and Mrs. Ronald were quite tuckered in. Tea at home was a simple one. Baked trout for Ronald, but for Mrs. Ronald, Apart from not being a good sailor on the sea, she was also not a big fish fan, but not those that could look up at her from the plate anyway. So Mrs. Ronald had fish fingers. To go with their fish, they had jacket potatoes and mixed veg. Just time for a spot of telly and a reflection of the day, and all too soon it was time for bed. Good night, Ronald. Good night, Mrs. Ronald.